Welcome to today's Google Hangout. We got a great show for you today. We have the boss, the editor-in-chief, Bobby Halton, has been kind enough to join us today. We also have Chief Thomas from Montgomery County, Maryland, who runs the Command Competency Program that I keep hearing rave reviews about from paid and volunteer firefighters. And of course, we have Dave Polikoff, who needs no introduction. He's a regular on the Hangout, from Battalion Chief from Montgomery County, Maryland, and FDIC instructor. So Dave, I'm going to start with you first. Introduce Chief Thomas and kind of give us a little background and get us involved in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. This is first of all, welcome, Kelvin. I'm glad that you're joining us. I've known Kelvin for a long time. We came up as firefighters together in the 1st Battalion, where we cut our teeth right on the DC-PG County line. Kelvin has taken on the role as Battalion Chief of Training at our training academy and has taken over the Command Competency Program amongst other programs up there. But what he's done is he's evolved this program to hone it to a really sharp, excellent program that we use to actually certify our chief officers, be it career or volunteer. We're all falling under the same umbrella. We're all falling under the same requirements. So what Kelvin has done over the last, I want to say 3 to 4 years, is really developed this program, brought it into the spotlight, and it's becoming a model for the country. We get numerous people from all over the world come over to take a look at the program that he has. So without spoiling everything, I'm going to let Kelvin Thomas, Battalion Chief Kelvin Thomas, go ahead and take it from here, and he can finish his introduction.
All right. Well, thanks for that great introduction, Dave. It's a pleasure joining you guys. I think it's my 2nd time on here. I think I did it a couple of years ago. But nevertheless, yeah, I've been in Montgomery County for 30 plus years now. I've been a battalion chief for, I guess, going on about 9 years. Been assigned to the training academy, my current location, for 3 years. And during that 3 years, I've had the pleasure of managing the Command Competency Program, which was already in place before I got here. But I've had the great pleasure of working with some good folks, and really what we think we have brought this program to another level. So it's definitely a pleasure being here and discussing what we have in store for our program and maybe what it entails in the future.
Chief Halton, do you want to weigh in on the importance of command competencies for professional and volunteer firefighters?
Well, I don't think you can underestimate it. Command competencies, as I understand them, you're talking about the basic, skills that you need, the meta skills, if you need to get into a system and make it operate, right? How do people make sense of where they're going from point A to point B, what's expected of them, and how they're supposed to get there? Those are the meta competencies when you're talking about command competencies. And then I think as you get inside a system, then it starts to boil down locally, right? In other words, what a battalion does versus what a division does might have certain nuances from a system the size of, say, a Montgomery County, and then you take it down to, say, an Oakville, Texas, where there may be a much smaller system. So I think command competencies are going to have some variance in them, but I think the meta competencies are critical skills. And I think those start when you're like, 3 years old and you learn how to share and play and communicate and understand body language and all that good stuff. And then it kind of moves through the system. So it'd be fascinating to hear how they're being taught, and even more fascinating to see how people are taking them back, locally and making them work. Because, whether it was Ben Franklin or Tip O'Neill, you can pick your author there, but everything is local. At the end of the day, you can talk about the national this and the national that, but at 5 o'clock, all the national people go home. The rest of us are still hanging out.
They go to work. Calvin, can you explain kind of how the program works? And we'll just kind of take apart the nuts and bolts of the program.
Well, it's a program. There's a lot of components to the program. But in a nutshell, it's a program that allows us to input expectations of our command officers here in the county. You know, we already have policies in place that tell us what to do in certain situations, but very few of them tell us how to conduct ourselves as leaders, as command officers. So that's what this program does. Really, I think what we're evolving into is really doing more teaching, more learning pieces of the program. We're very good at evaluating ourselves. It's a peer evaluation system where there's a panel of fellow chief officers who evaluate the performance of other chief officers is basically what it is. So again, there's a lot of different parts I can discuss with it, but you know, what it does is it sets the tone. It puts all the command officers on a level playing field, and it allows them to carry out, you know, their functions as chief officers, you know, again, right on the level playing field, basically, for lack of a better way of explaining it. So again, it's big on expectations. We know what it is expected of us as chief officers within our county because we train for it and we test on it every year.
Now, Chief, how many days is this program of peer review, and does it what are the actual components of that peer review?
All right, so this program is basically an annual program. So we start at the beginning of a calendar year. We start with continuing education, where we allow other chief officers and line officers who may have specialty things that they'd like to talk about, and we offer that type of training from the beginning of the year. Then we start tracking those hours. So let me get into the actual parts of it. So, you know, one of the first parts of this command competency piece is having buy-in. You have to have buy-in. We work in a combination department where we have career and volunteer. So one side doesn't dictate how this thing works necessarily, but we have buy-in. And to back up that buy-in, we have a county law that says that we have to do it now. And then we also have policies that further back that up. We have training policies alike. So, and then from there, you know, all of our chief officers always had to have certain training standards or credentials that they had to achieve before they could actually promote into the rank of chief officer. So that factors in as well. Those training standards, meaning you got to have certain leadership courses, a certain amount of education on the career side, those types of things. I mentioned continuing education. We also have written assignments towards the latter part of the years when we began testing on the things that we've learned throughout the year, where we have written assignments that we give them, and all these command officers have to successfully complete or pass these assignments. And then from a written assignment, we go right into a practical assignment where we sit in a vehicle in what we call a lab, a command competencies lab, and we go through a scenario. Everybody goes through the same scenario, and we're evaluated by our peers on that. And so there's repercussions if you don't pass, but we like to reiterate that the program is not a gotcha. It's not meant to, you know, to exclude people necessarily, but it will by design if they can't keep up with where we should be in terms of our knowledge, skills, and abilities. But at the same time, we have other measures in place where we groom people and prepare them to be tested, both written and on the practical scale. So, you know, that's a gist of how the program is set up.
And Dave, one thing that we were talking about that you were very complimentary about was the fact that the scenarios, while sometimes they're complicated, they're realistic to what a battalion chief and a deputy will face. Can you weigh in on that, Chief Polikoff?
Yeah, we've always tried to incorporate whatever scenario that we're talking about. We don't try to make it too complex. We make it to what you're going to face, like your bread and butter operations that you're going to face, 90 to 95% of the time. And when we put that scenario together, we start to look at what are the things that we're looking for. And like Kelvin had stated, we have policies and procedures in place of how we're supposed to respond and how we're supposed to command these incidents. And keeping everybody held to the same standard allows for continuity throughout the entire process. So one of the things that the thing that we're doing this year is a basement fire in a single family dwelling. It's probably one of the most common fires that's run in the United States. On top of that, prior to that, we did a type 5 construction or a donut or Texas wrap type construction with fire with occupants that needed to be accountable for. Prior to that, the year before, 2 years ago, was an active shooter situation where we were pretty hot and heavy on the active shooter situation with patients that needed to be triaged, treated, and transported. And everybody ran through that particular scenario. And when we build this scenario, once we get it done, then we come through and we build what we call our COPDI, which is the actual training portion where we offer the class. And we pretty much break down what the entire process is going to be, what the scenario is. And like Kelvin said, it's not a gotcha thing. We throw everything out there so everybody understands exactly what is going to be expected of them, what the scenario is, and then they have to come in and perform. And I like to compare it to, as officers in the fire service, as line officers, as chief officers, or even firefighters, we expect our firefighters to perform at a specific level. And if they can't, then we either need to bring them on board or they need to find another job. Not trying to be as harsh as that. And that's career and volunteer. The same expectations come from our chief officers. The people that are riding the fire engines and putting their lives on the line expect the chief officers to operate at a specific standard and to be the best that they can be in their arena, to make sure that we're leading the people the way that they're supposed to be when we actually have people being put in harm's way. So this whole program, once it's all delivered, ensures that everybody has been tested the same way, with the same scenario, with the same parameters, and at the end of the day, they get certified for the next following year, and then we start it all over again.
One of the things I like about the program is that even Chief Thomas goes through the program. So peer review is critical, that we see from company officers on up. A lot of times the chief or the captain, they want to kind of stand back and let everybody else go and just critique it. And even as a company officer, I was always volunteering to go first, because I figured that way when I mess up, it doesn't look as bad as messing up when you go third. So Chief Halton, can you speak to the quality of results you get when you do peer review and you know that you're going to be reviewed no matter where you are in the game? Because FDIC, whether you're on the board or somebody who's teaching every year at FDIC, you still go through the same peer review as everybody else. And I think that's one of the things that sets fire engineering and Clarion apart. Chief Hall, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think what I've heard so far, I think scenario-based training is extremely important, especially if you're going to set, performance benchmarks, which I think are obviously arbitrary in some ways, but almost necessary in others, right? There's certain, as we talked about earlier, and I think Chief Thomas said it very well, there's just certain things you need to be able to do elegantly in order to command an incident or manage a fire, and I think Dave said it, lead, right? And those are just things that are, there's going to be guys and gals in the system that are going to do it somewhat differently. But when we do peer review, you're basically benchmarking on almost that individual's ability, style notwithstanding, to meet that benchmark, right? In other words, somebody with a real baritone might be able to direct people more forcefully just because of the baritone, right? In the military, they said that they tell the young officers to take the bass out when they're talking to seriously statured enlisted people. That's a very common thing to tell a young lieutenant. Take the bass out, right? Don't go down deep with people who, have earned your respect. Maybe don't have that rank, but have earned that respect. So I think there's an element of style that's involved that I like what you're doing from a peer angle, because especially when you're talking about a peer angle, within that system, you kind of know people, right? You kind of know, okay, well, you know, you understand their style. So I like the peer review part of it. Scenario based is always interesting, right? What's interesting about scenarios is we're omnipotent because we know the ending, you know, especially for the creator, which is kind of, you know, fascinating. We can throw different variables in there, but you know, it's a fascinating deal. And because without getting too wonky, you know, we're a socio-technical operation, very complex one, not complicated, but complex. And so, you know, we develop things based upon what we know to be the worst case possible, right? One of the greatest stories that I lived through was we were doing scenario planning in Oklahoma City. Gosh, I don't know, 20 years ago plus. John Henson, a bunch of the old timers were there, and it was a big FEMA thing. And they were planning to put the scenario together, and somebody said, well, we should do a Cat 5. And the guys from Oklahoma City said, well, we've never had a Cat 5 here, so we're not going to do that. It's so unrealistic. 2 weeks later, they had a Cat 5 tear right through the middle of the city for 20 miles. So, you know, but we were doing the scenario planning based on what's the worst thing that could happen here, right? And that's always based on what the worst thing that happened there was. And it's fascinating. You know, today we're starting to understand the battle between Hobbes and Rousseau, right? And life is a struggle, and between those two theories of Hobbes with rules and regulations and structure and the social contract and all that, and Rousseau with, oh, you know, society's awful and people are wonderful and we should all just run naked through the woods. Right down the middle of that, there's a happy median, and I think that's what you do when you do peer review, right? You find that happy median. Nobody wants to see, you know, no disrespect to 70-year-old people. I'm almost 70 years old, but nobody wants to see happy old hippies running naked through the streets. But by the same token, we don't want people in brown shirts kicking in our doors because we're not using the proper pronouns. So there's that happy line, you know, and there's PJ. I think talking about people locking Rousseau. There's the guy that Piaget would laugh at. Believe, stop believing, start knowing. Piaget, probably the smartest man in the history of mankind, had that battle between religion and science his entire life and never figured it out, right? The guy was so brilliant. He wrote a paper about turtles or some nonsense and submitted it. And it was so well received, they wanted to make him the curator of the museum. So they sent him a letter saying, one of the most famous museums in Europe wrote and said, you got to be the curator. That's the most brilliant paper ever. And Piaget's parents wrote back and said, well, he's only 10. So we're going to have, and he spent his whole life trying to figure out the name of your website, which I think was just like the irony of it. I was never lost on me. I was like, oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. It'd probably say Piaget to frickin' you and your partner, you'd be looking for a bottle of wine. But anyway, so which is,
they're always looking for a bottle of wine.
And I couldn't help, right? I couldn't help it. I saw this, I saw that Face for Radio show up, and I had to say something. I had to give him a hard time. But so I like it. I think that with scenarios, especially with peer review scenarios, if you're comfortable enough with your peers, right? Like most of us are. I mean, that's what these conversations are about. You know, while you're building the scenario, I would throw it out to Dave and Chief Thomas. You know, how okay is it to say, especially like when you're going, Chief, like because you're the scenario builder, how is it okay for one of us, like say we were running you through it, to say with a basement fire, to say, okay, you know, there's throw in a variable that maybe wasn't built into the original just to challenge you. Is that an acceptable thing to do when you're running those scenarios? Because oftentimes, you know, I worked in Albuquerque, and I know it's not anything like, you know, how, you know, Montgomery County and Prince George County, where people never cheat. But in Albuquerque, we might let the other guy know what the scenario was if we liked them, you know. So not that we were cheating, you know, we were just kind of helping our buddies out. So how okay would it be during a peer-reviewed scenario, especially for someone who is the creator, to maybe throw, you know, throw a few you know, ruffles in it that maybe weren't built into it originally?
Well, once the scenario is set, it's set. We don't, because in that could give somebody an unfair advantage or vice versa. So once this thing is done and we begin testing, actual official testing, we don't change anything about the exam at all. But, you know, one of the first things we do is during the year, we go back and review last year. I operate closely with my superiors and counterparts in operations. Again, I'm in the training academy. And so we try to identify what areas need to be addressed during, you know, the next process. So in the case of the building fire, we had recently, we had a new policy created. It's been in effect for about a year, a little over a year now. We know that we've had issues with basement fires, fighting them, commanding them, just different aspects of it. So we try to inject all of those things into a scenario. But I'm the program manager for this program, so I don't put everything on my shoulders to have to be the creator, and I'm not the end all be all. I do everything by committee, and our committees are comprised of career volunteers, you name it. So everybody has a piece in it. Now, if it comes to a tiebreaker or something, I need to make a decision on something, I'll make the decision and we'll move forward. But you know, that's pretty much the way we do it. And, you know, peer evaluation, it's tough. It's tough finding peer evaluators because, again, you're evaluating your superiors, you're evaluating people that are below you, perhaps, people that you have a whole lot of respect for that may have done way more than you have. So you put in some precarious positions potentially. But, you know, if your grading is accurate, your benchmarks are accurate, you can get through it and it's a respectable process. We had the fire chief come through a few days ago and we evaluated him. Now we have a hands-on fire chief. He likes to still run calls as the chief of the department.
I would have called out. I would have called out sick that day. I would not evaluate my.
That's the day I want to be there. You know, so you know, believe it or not, the fire chief wasn't perfect. We gave him some recommendations, some immediate feedback. And the toughest thing to do is give somebody some negative. We try to make it constructive criticism, but that's what we do.
So
and
if you don't mind me asking, you know, most of us listening are very familiar with, you know, Dig Combustion and SimsUshare and all those programs. Do you use one of those programs for your simulations? Do you build like a fire and smoke kind of thing and a command center kind of deal?
Yes, we use the digital combustion program here. We've used that for a number of years. This year we started kind of experimenting with SimsUshare, but the verdict is not out on that. But right now, yeah, it's all digital combustion.
Yeah, they're all good. I mean, they're all good. So have you built like you know, like the command training centers? Do you have like is it the back of a Suburban or the front of a Suburban or a command? Do you create that kind of environment too during the deal?
Oh, absolutely. So within our center, we have a command vehicle that sits inside a covered facility in a single vehicle bay, if you will. And we have a big 80-inch screen that sits, you know, right in front of that vehicle. That's where the simulations are. And the way we run our command platforms here in the county is we prefer to run them in what we call a sterile environment inside the Suburban, inside the compartment of a vehicle. We've gotten away from setting up outside, you know, flipping the hatch up and doing it that way. We just prefer to do it in our county, you know, inside the environment. That way we can control who's saying what to us, who's getting in the vehicle. We feel like we can hear communications a little better. So that's what we do, and that's what we mimic in our command center.
Now, Chief Thomas, when they're talking, when the IC is talking on the radio and say he establishes or she establishes a division, is there somebody role playing on the other side of the radio to give them information or her information?
Oh, absolutely. The way we set up our typical evaluation session is we have 3 evaluators. One of the 3 evaluators will be the role player for all the units on the box. So or whatever it is we're running. Kind of odd to hear the same voice, but when people are into whatever they're doing, it really doesn't matter. So we had that one person playing a role. Another person from the panel will be scribing, just writing down using we call tactical worksheets or command charts, just reflecting everything that person is saying and doing. And then another person is staffing our evaluation form. That's where our benchmarks are located, checking off, writing notes, things like that when they hit or miss benchmarks. And then there's a fourth position. It's a dispatcher operator position. That's the person who's acting as a dispatcher, dispatching a call, updating resources that may be requested, sending images or units over to our MDC, we call it our mobile data computer in the car, and moving the digital combustion images. So that's what that person does.
Dave, have you noticed a difference in the county over the years as this became more prevalent, that individuals are getting better at talking on the radio? Because talking on the radio is a skill just like stretching hose or putting up a ladder.
Yeah, I think that even with the introduction of the new IRP, like Kelvin said, it's about a little over a year old. We didn't fundamentally change the way we do business. We fundamentally changed the way the policy was written and how it is brought forth and evaluated, and then we can add to it. It's a series of appendices instead of just an outright policy, and it breaks it down into a whole bunch of different parts. So with that, we're allowed to actually take a look at each component of the IRP, and it gives you your standard verbiage of what needs to be said on the radio, what needs to be heard on the radio. It reduces the amount of communication that's actually being thrown out over the radio. You're not being clogged with a lot of talking on the radio. And I think, in my personal opinion, I think we've gotten a lot better when it comes to giving on-scene reports, giving our supplemental update reports, as well as assuming command when the command officer arrives on the scene, getting what we call an LCAN, or actually we get that situation update report, and then we assume that command. It's a pretty smooth process. Now, I'm going to toot my own horn here for a second, because we talked about that inside command where we run our command inside a vehicle. That's how we do it in the Washington metropolitan area. So if anybody is curious of how that is, back in August, Frank and I wrote an article on commanding inside and outside of a vehicle. So you can read that and you kind of get a feel for how we do things in Montgomery County. And we talk about tactical worksheets. And if you're interested in how our program is actually put together on a smaller scale, I'll be presenting something like that at the hot training in April. So I'm going to toot my own horn, because we want that class to fill up. We want these people to be able to go through these scenarios and see how we use simulation programs and light buildings on fire right in front of you while you command it. So that's what I'll say about that, and then I'll go ahead and continue to advertise myself through Twitter and everything else. But what we have found is that when we listen to these calls and we tell people that when a box alarm goes out in Montgomery County, not only are the bosses listening to it because they have the radios piped into their offices. Kelvin's sitting in his office right now; he can hear all the box alarms going out, plus all the radios that he have. But because of today's modern technology, everybody in the world can listen to your box alarm go out. So you're on a national or on an international stage when a call goes out, and listening to how we're giving our on-scene reports now and how we're assuming command, everything's flowing the same. And it's from the 1st Battalion to the 5th Battalion in our county. Everybody's doing the same thing, using the same verbiage, using the NIMS terminology constantly. And so we're all operating off the same sheet of music. Same thing holds true if we mutuate to Prince George's County, Washington, D.C., Fairfax County, Loudoun County. We're all using the same verbiage. So it's we call that our national COG region. And I've seen some tremendous improvements on our radio communication, and I really do think we're doing a great job.
And I think that's a great point, is that you got everybody speaking the same language. Because I know we go to clear language, But if people don't understand the nomenclature that you're using, you're kind of defeating the purpose. So getting everybody out there practicing that is critical. Chief Thomas, you talked about that in Montgomery County, you're commanding inside the car. We're in the Northeast, upper Northeast. We're generally commanding outside. But the benchmarks, no matter whether you're in Montgomery County, Maryland, or in Phoenix, Arizona, for the most part, are going to be the same no matter what position you are in command of the fire.
Well, the benchmark should be reflective of whichever way you operate, what standards you have where you are. So that's how we develop the benchmark. So I would say they could be different. I mean, if we had a national standard, then yeah, I would expect most of those benchmarks to be the same. Generally speaking, I mean, you know, assuming or establishing command is the same thing, regardless of where you are. But the various benchmarks or ways, things that go into that are, you know, differ from one jurisdiction to another. So I just wanted to backtrack real quick on that communication piece. You know, effective communication, I mean, that starts early in your career. That's not something that, you know, when you're trying to become appointed or promoted to the rank of chief officer, that you start with the communication. Some years ago, we started including command competencies in some of our basic fire development courses, fire officer development courses. We have a strategy and tactics course, which is a local course that we teach here within our county, and it's a required course for promotion. But we started injecting tabletops and basic things like that, where the students would talk on radios. I mean, you know, what we were finding is that firefighters, they were great at talking to hospitals because they spent a fair amount of time on an EMS unit, but they weren't so good at, you know, pulling up in front of a building and describing what they had and, you know, making those types of transmissions. So I would say if you want to be successful with communications, you need to start these folks off perhaps before they even become line officers in your programs. And so again, on the benchmarks, they're totally reflective of, you know, what your expectations are within your jurisdiction.
Is the time that elapses during the simulation, is it a realistic or is it abridged? Because one of the things that command officers also need is to have a little bit of patience sometimes. And when they assign a task, allow the company to actually perform it. Is there anything built in for that? Or is it, we know that there's time constraints because of everything that's going on?
Yeah, so let's see, to frame that out, our scenarios generally run 30, 35 minutes, and then we cut them off. The benchmarks that we have established, you're able to fulfill those benchmarks within that time frame easily, because we write the scenarios. So if you're Division I or whatever, and you tell them, hey, you know, perform a primary search of the first floor, we give you time. That time is built in throughout that scenario for you to carry that out. So yes, there is some natural time. There is some artificiality built into that. But yeah, we do allot time for, you know, various tasks.
So good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, apologize for running a little late here this morning. But I wanted to jump in here and backtrack to something Chief Halton mentioned before, as well as we have a question from a regular Twitter follower. Chief Halton mentioned, you know, is it a scenario where maybe as a curator, maybe at times you'll pass some inside information off, some insider training to help along? And I think there's a time and a place for that. You know, in an exam or testing, no. But if you're using the command simulator for training and education, if you pass off little pieces of information, the membership and the command officers, they're now going to be in the books. They're going to be looking at the policies, looking at the procedures, maybe learning more at the end of the day than what they would if they just sat through the simulator. Obviously, in an exam or a testing scenario, absolutely not. But during a training or an educational session, I think slowly dropping little crumbs before they go in may actually help the overall learning environment. So I think there is a time and a place for that.
One of the things that that we talked about earlier with I'm not sure if you were there or not. We have after we build the scenario, we put together our COPDI, which is the actual classroom portion. And what Kelvin and I have done, especially with this one, is we front loaded the entire scenario in the 3-hour time lot for this particular for the COPDI, or for this training session. So we tell them right off the get-go, it's a house fire. There's a fire in the basement. You may find some hoarding conditions. You may find some fire. We talk about knee walls, so that should let you know that there's fire, and maybe going to be some fire in the knee walls. And then when it's all said and done, we break down every single benchmark that we have in our incident response policy, and magically, some of them are highlighted a different color than some of the others. So we're front loading it to allow people to know that this is what the scenario is, and what we're testing these people on is how well do you perform, and how well can you lead people, embed objectives, and then make sure that they're carried out correctly, and hear what the role players are telling you, and are you going to act accordingly, and are you using your tactical worksheets to track everybody? Because at the end of the day, when they come in from that practical testing, we take their tactical worksheet, we put it side by side to ours, and we want it to almost be a mirror image, give or take a couple of things. So like Kelvin said at the beginning, it's not a gotcha thing. It's a test, but you already have the information. And like Kelvin said earlier, it can be kind of intimidating when you have your boss, or your boss's boss, or your boss's boss's boss on the other end of that radio, and you're evaluating them, and you have to tell them, hey, you did pretty good, but here's some areas that you need to improve on based on how we wrote the program. I've had to send somebody back through that didn't pass last year, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and that I learned lots of things from. But it only makes us better, and and it is difficult to tell somebody that hey, we want you to come back, and here's why. And they get a little perturbed about it, but they understand where they're coming from. But we lay it all out. It is not a surprise. It's not a promotional exam. It's like, here's what the scenario is. Here's your benchmarks. These are things that you need to make sure that you account for. And after all of that, we still have people that don't pass, and they have to come back through. So, but it's consistent all the way through. Like Kelvin said, we run each scenario exactly the same for every single person. So nobody says, well, they didn't do that for me, but they did that for you, and that's not fair. And we're not going to try to get into that. And we spend a lot of time making this scenario, and then working it out on each other. We beta test to make sure it's right. And during that beta testing, we will tweak things or change things if it has to be changed, until we get that final product, that polished product that we actually present to everybody. And as long as I've been doing it, and as long as Kelvin's had this in his lap, it's gone through, I don't want to say flawless, because nothing's flawless, but it's been a really good, and it's getting better every single year. And it's going to be the standard for the nation, if not internationally. We've had people, again, from all over the country, from all over the world, come and take a look at our command program. So we're on point.
Yeah, to touch on the security piece of it, yes, the program, once you get into your evaluations piece of it, people have to respect your program. They have to have confidence that it is a good bona fide program. There's no cheating or anything like that. It has to be a confidential program, meaning you go in and test. You don't need people hearing what you're saying or whatever. The public is not privy to your performance, neither are other firefighters, so we secure it that way. Anybody involved in the process from a development standpoint, evaluation standpoint, are bound by a security agreement, which means that they cannot go out and tell people the specifics of the exercise. Can they mentor people? Yes, absolutely. They can go and recite policies, go make sure that you know certain expectations all day long. Not a problem. But they can't tell you, at the 4-minute mark, the basement's going to explode, so this is what you need to do after that or before that to prepare. You know what I mean? So it is a very secure process, and people need to be confident that it is what it is.
We also have one question from Twitter I just want to offer the group, and this was prior to me getting here, so make sure that I don't even understand it all. So it says, You said this was county law, but this is a state of Maryland accredited program as well. So they want to know that it's county law, I guess, but they want to know if it's accredited program within the state.
Well, our training academy is an accredited training academy, and we happen to be an accredited fire department, county fire department. We have in our county charters, one of the chapters, chapter 21, has specific laws in it about the fire department. And that's where one of the laws exists, is in our chapter 21 of the county law. So it has nothing to do necessarily with the state of Maryland, because they don't govern us to that level.
So I've got a question for you, David and Chief Thomas. So very familiar with the Blue Card program, which is basically the same kind of sets and reps, repetition, developing habituation so people know how to use, command worksheets and hit different benchmarks and things of that nature. And John and Nick have put together a great curriculum with a wide variety of fires, commercial, basement, the whole enchilada. Yours is more, as I understand, more locally focused, where you look at an annual kind of overview of maybe what was going on and try to build up maybe where you feel we were a little deficient, maybe, or maybe could have. Can we always do a better job? Yeah. Scenario planning is really, really important. One of the things that's interesting when we look at and I don't know how to ask this question properly, and please don't take it wrong, because I think what you're doing is phenomenal. So it's two questions. What makes your program different, other than it's more regionally based, which I like, because being the guy who actually came up with the Blue Card idea, my idea was to do exactly what you all are doing, right? Take a council of governments or a region and then train with scenarios so that vernacular and policy and procedures and worksheets and things like that are shared, so that my whole idea was predicated on that if your organization gets hit by some natural disaster or some event and you need to recall or call in personnel, you don't have to do the standard. My idea with Blue Card, when I came up with the idea, was not to bring in mutual aid where Bipperville and Bopperville send you 2 engines with people on it and Bipperville and Bopperville are paying for it. But my idea with Blue Card was for you to be able to say, I want to rehire people from all over the Council of Government who are off duty to just come in and backfill, because we know they went through our program and they are blue carded, for lack of a better word, or certified by your training facility as corely competent as company officers, battalion chiefs, division chiefs, engineers, whatever the system was. That was my idea for Blue Card. John and Nick and Chief B took it to a more national level, where they're teaching tactics, which you then you take it and you kind of meld it down to your local. It sounds like you've kind of done kind of a similar hybrid, where you've come inside, built a command training center, looking at local issues, local vernacular, local problems, and then with the Council of Governments, it sounds like you're kind of reaching out, at least within your organization, to kind of do that, which I really enjoy. And that was really what I was hoping Blue Card would do. And my hope was that, and my hope is that your organizations are now realizing that if something does happen to a particular community, you don't just have to, mutual aid doesn't mean you just have to send an engine. The engines are probably okie dokie. It's generally the people who are burnt out, or we need more people. So are you able to share people? That's my first question. And hopefully that was kind of my dream in Blue Card, which changed, and that's fine. I didn't have the energy to take it any further than the idea, which is very common with me. I'm great with ideas, lousy with follow through. So no, hell, that's, first admit your problem, right? First admit it and then embrace it. That's what I do. So my next question is this, and it's kind of a wonky question, but I think this is the right group, and I hope the audience doesn't mind. So as we look at cognitive process, right, Dr. Woods and people like that, and we think about how we're hardwired, basically. So, the old story is Darwin tells the story where he was at a zoo and a snake hit the glass, and Darwin jumped back and just reflexively, although he knew the glass was there, the snake couldn't hit him, right? And no matter how many times the snake repeated it, Darwin jumped back, because that's just how we're hardwired, right? The neurons to do that are like 3. The neurons to develop a sentence are like 22,855,422 million. bazillion to form a sentence, right? But to jump back, because that goes back, 3 million years, right? Arguably, maybe at least 600,000 evolutionary from we separated out from the chimpanzees. So anyway, that's an old piece of biology, right? The problem with all our scenarios and such that we do, and I'm not disrespecting them, I'm a huge fan, huge supporter. But as my friends here know, I was teaching scenarios with Ted Nee in 1988 or 90. We were doing scenario. That's how old we are, right? So we were doing scenario-based decision making, and much along the lines of what we're doing now. All the technology is better, and people got Suburbans cut in half and all that happy stuff, and God bless you for it. So, but here's what we know now, and which is fascinating. We now know from Woods's work and all these other people that the real stresses and pressures and Klein and people like that, when you're really when it's a real fire, biologically, things are different. We're jumping back from that snake. Like the brain doesn't even see the snake before we're jumping back, right? It's the same thing with fire. There's an element of emotion and connection. And we also know that people in those situations, they're good for about four real decisions, right? That's the bandwidth. And then they're pretty, I don't care if you're Richard Dawkins. I don't care if you're Nassim Taleb, or, pick your genius here. You're good for four things: under pressure, in context, limited resources, heavy time constraints, and high risk, right? So spotting the apparatus, telling your crew what to do, doing a good size up, which is the size up exercise. Chief Ted Nee and I did that years ago. I continue to support that. I think it's a really cool little thing. Just send out a picture and tell people, get on the radio and describe what you're seeing. Just get comfortable. I don't care if it's day one on the job. Maybe the first day of recruit class, we should do that. Just to get people to get comfortable saying, boy, I see a house with smoke and fire coming out of it. Okay, good, next. Because they'll grow. They'll get better and get better and get better. But how do we take that now that we know that, right? And how do we build a better system? Because Chief B once said, if we're doing something the same way we've been doing it for 20 years, we're probably doing it wrong based on that alone. That's a quote from Chief B. Well, we've been doing the incident command system, and I'm complicit. I'm on page 3 of the book, and thank my friends for helping me write this book deal with Chief B. We're still doing the first do assumes command, which in my mind, in a robust system like yours, where the communications are so elegant and instantaneous, and the staffing is so well developed, it's almost ridiculous that you put that much emphasis on somebody who it might be his first or her first fire. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of coming out oppositionally to that, because I think cognitively, knowing what we know now, it doesn't make sense. More fingers on the knife, we make better decisions. And so I don't know, how do we manage that, right? And how are systems evolving, especially a system like yours? Are you looking at that, right? Or are you reading Hofnagel? Are you reading those people and trying to figure out, okay, how can we do this better? Because, it's okay if you're sitting in the command center where you're not going to die. And we know that, unless you guys are really going overboard with the realistic stuff, and you've got, families that you're executing if they screw up, which is highly probable. I mean, it is Maryland, for God's sakes. I'm just kidding. It's a joke. But so my question would be, how much are we looking at the cognitive side of it so that we continue to build a better system, right? I mean, it's one thing to improve competencies, and it's another thing to really challenge. I think it was Jefferson who said, challenge boldly, even the existence of God. For if there is one, wouldn't he be more honored by the homage of reason than blind faith? So it's almost along those lines, right? Shouldn't we be questioning everything? And I would really love to see, what you all thought of that. In other words, do we really need to have the first do start giving out assignments in every system? Now, in some, obviously, maybe you do, but not in every system. And is there a better way to peel a banana? I don't know. I'm just asking the question, but I guess the reason that I'm asking the question is because I think there is.
Well, Bobby, I'll take the first quick stab at this, and there is a better way to peel the banana. It's from the bottom. But I think every jurisdiction is a little bit different. But what I think that Montgomery County's doing right, that's really helping they're volunteers and career firefighters, and I hear from them, is that their SOPs are actually being used. And we see too many departments where the SOPs are cut and paste from somewhere else, and it doesn't reflect the operational realities that the firefighters face. So in our system, the first due engine company, technically they're in combative command. They don't announce it. They're essentially going to work based off their SOPs. And one of the best battalion chiefs I ever worked for, who retired probably 15 years ago, used to say, if I'm going to be first due to the fire, I pull over to the side and let the first due companies get there, make their initial decisions, start to stretch, essentially set the table. And my job as the battalion chief is to calm down, arrive on scene, look what they did, and then start thinking, all right, this is the decision they made. Now my job is to cover their blind spots. What am I doing with the third and fourth due that is either going to help their situation? So sometimes having SOPs that are realistic so that first company can go into operation, and then when the battalion chief can come there, can kind of cover the blind spots, helps. And I think having safety officers, more than just one, also helps, because the safety officer on scene doesn't have the same exact stress as the incident commander. And if the safety officer is there for the right reason, we find it often in New Haven where the safety officer can quietly say something to the chief or the division boss to just cover one of those blind spots that they missed. So we really started something new under Chief Alston and Chief Vendetto of putting safe. Today we had our tower crane operation at 5 in the morning, lowering the operator for training. And we put a safety officer on the catwalk, a safety officer in the cab, a safety officer in the ground. And it's just simply to double check things, no stress, and kind of cover some blind spots. And I'll go to Chief Thomas for his reply to that.
No, I agree with that. We have SOPs. Dave mentioned IRP. That's our incident response policy. It has all these appendixes that relate to various incident types, whether it be technical rescue or fire in a structure or whatever. So we happen to be in I would say in an area that's very strong in their culture is very strong. We abide by our standard operating procedures. So that does help that. And that does take some of the pressure off of the first arriving company officer, so that they don't have to make all of the decisions all at one time, because those decisions are predetermined. Now, if we need to go against that, then yes, they will have to inject and then make the appropriate changes. So we're fortunate that we're in an environment that we do have SOPs, and they're always evolving. And one of the struggles that this program has is, what do we do next? How do we improve? And that's a struggle that I think we're all going to have. But as long as we know that, I think our programs will keep progressing.
Dave Polikoff, do you want to speak to that? Because what I think is great about the program is, just like when you stretch hose in the firehouse and you bring it up the stairs, it's not 100% realistic, but at least gets the cobwebs out, gets the company stretching. They get better, as Chief Halton said, reps. So it's a starting point, and it gets officers using their brain and talking on the radio.
The one of the things that and it is, having these reps, it keeps you fresh. It's just like tying knots, throwing ladders, pulling hose lines. Doing the same thing with the commands is allowing you to ensure that you know your policies and that you're getting and receiving information from the units that are on the fireground. One of the things that I want to address with what Chief Halton said was, with the blue card versus, what we do. What we do in Montgomery County is we follow the NIMS standard. And that was the standard that was written back in, I think it was 2005. And we've adopted that. We don't use 100% of all the terminology because we don't have those type of incidents that happen all the time. On our incident management team, the National Capital Region Incident Management Team, which I'm part of, we use the NIM standard as well. We use all those definitions. But for the fireground, when it comes to the COG region, which is the Washington metropolitan area, we're all operating off the same sheet of music. So when I get mutually to Prince George's County, I can jump in their command post and use their tactical worksheets, and we're speaking the same language. Same thing with Fairfax, Arlington, Loudoun. The only county that uses Blue Card in Maryland is Howard. They're the only ones. And their terminology is it's similar, but they use terminology that we just don't use in the COG. Now, we border Howard County, so we go mutual aid into Howard County. We know how to use their Blue Card. We know how to use their terminologies and things like that. So it's very seamless for all the jurisdictions that we run into. But we follow the NIM standard, which is the standard, which should be the standard that was put forth back in 2005. We have policies and procedures in place that tell that first due company officer the minimum things that they have to do. They have to give that initial on-scene report. That's in the front of the cab. When they get out of the cab, they have to do their 360, or if they can't, say why they can't, so somebody else has to cover that. Then they have to give their situation update report, which is that additional information that you find from your 360 and as you're moving towards the building, including the occupants and what their status is. And then they have a choice of taking a stationary command post, which is staying outside, or tactical command, which means that they're actually going inside. They're having a limited command role, but they are going to be in charge of that incident. They don't have to tell the second due engine company to pick up their line, pull a backup line, or do whatever. It's built into our policies. The only time they have to say something on the radio is if that policy needs to be deviated from. Other than that, it's seamless. Once they give that on-scene report, there's really no other talking going on unless there's something else that has to be said, or the chief officer gets on the scene, gets that updated report from that unit officer, assumes a stationary command post, and then they roll right on through with command. We've reduced the radio traffic in our county significantly because of our policies and procedures and because of how we run our command. We introduced the LCAN, which is that location conditions action needs. And one of the things that one of our division chiefs talked about is when you ask for an LCAN, everybody on the fireground knows that they're not going to say anything until that person gives that last bit of information on the LCAN, which is the needs. Once that initial needs is finished, that transmission is ended, radio time is free. So nobody should be interrupting anybody when they're talking on the radio. It's a seamless process, and it works. And we do continually evolve our policies and how we do things. And the IRP, like I said, is about a little over a year old now, and it seems to be working well. And we have adapted to it pretty decent.
I think one of the other positive pieces that you just kind of alluded to is you continuously evolve your policies. And I would assume that during these tests, that it's a good assessment of your policies to make sure nothing needs to be updated or tweaked also. On top of making sure everyone is on the same page, it's a good time to take a global look at some of those policies and procedures from locally, but also on the whole county, to make sure everybody's on the same page and nothing needs to be adjusted or tweaked. So when these major incidents do happen, you have a current copy of policies fresh with everybody, not just sitting in a 3-ring binder on the shelf.
I'm going to give Chief Halton the last word because we're at the witching hour. I'd like to thank Chief Thomas for coming on, and Dave Polikoff. And on the radio show, we asked Chief Thomas, but I'd like you to write an article about this because we've heard about Phoenix's program. We've heard about Blue Card, but Montgomery County's program hasn't been written about yet. And we'd really like to see that. Hopefully the editor-in-chief will give it the nod, but we'll let the boss say the last words. And we really appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to stop by this Google Hangout today. Chief Halton, take us off.
Hey, what an amazing program. And whether it's the peer review aspect of it, the local aspect of it, the fact that it encompasses multiple counties through the COG, that's unbelievable. The fact that you're looking at a review of, just things that had happened the year before, right or wrong or good or bad, that you're building off of, that's phenomenal, right? That's the grassroots side of it. Because the men and women in that system live through those events, so they're digging it. They got to be digging the heck out of it. Plus, Ben Franklin said that experience is a dear school, and a fool learns in no other. But if you can learn vicariously, that's the sign of a genius, according to somebody. And I can't remember who said that, but it's a great quote. And it may not be true, because I got a friend named Ruben Collado who gets married every 3 or 4 years and can't seem to figure that out either. He finds some woman he can't stand, he buys her house. So, but I think that as we move through systems, I really like what you're doing. And I think the fact that, we used to call them riding positions, we used to call them arrival assignments. And as Dave called them, now they've got, everything has better names now. We used to call giving the fire a dash. Now it's transitional attack. We weren't as eloquent, but we got the job done. So the terminology, be it local, I don't really care. I can barely understand people when I'm in Boston, but I can still buy a bowl of chowder, right? I go down south, I don't know what they're saying, but I eat grits. So, local is local, and that's okay. That's really good, I think. I think government that governs closest to the people is the best darn government we can possibly have, and it's the best darn fire protection we can possibly have. And I think NIMS, Dave, I question because I remember learning about NIMS like in the 90s. Maybe 2005 they signed the presidential proclamation or something, but as meaningless as that possibly was, unless the president's showing up at one of my fires, and God bless him, then he can make it great again, I guess. But who knows? Who cares? But I think it's a really neat program, and I think what's so neat about it is it's so well embraced, and that you've got buy-in at every level, and it's not the top down, right? And what's really cool was to hear that the top, the big guy, he went through it and he got a little beat up, which is great. I mean, that's really great. And good for him, whoever he is in the process. I don't know who he is. I might know him, and I apologize if he's pissed off at me right now, but I'm on meds. I'll blame it on the meds. So good. God bless him, and God bless you for what you're doing. Please write it up. I mean, what a great model. And the one thing I would say to everybody who's out there listening, you don't need to cut a Suburban in half, and you don't need to have the greatest simulation program. You can draw on a chalkboard, and yeah, it won't be as high fidelity, but just do it, right? And if you heard what Dave said and what the chief said, we're talking the same language. We're trying to hit the same marks. And are there going to be fires where things happen and we don't? Sure. Then next year we work on those, and we build and we grow. So the other thing I'd like to throw out at the end, it's Movember coming up. We're just coming up in Movember, and I cheat. So if I was in your system, I'd be telling guys what the scenario was. I'm just kidding. But not for the test. For the training, I would. And you did too. So it's okay. But it's Movember. So it's Men's Health, and it's really important. So I would ask you all, especially those of us in training, to get the word out that, hey, get tested, whether it's blood sugar, whether it's biological markers, whether it's cardiac, whether it's cancer markers, get your skin checked, colorectal, testicular, breast exams. Men get breast cancer too. It's Men's Health Month. It's a really, really serious thing. It's really, really, really serious. The worst thing in the world is to find out that you're stage 4 or stage 3. When you find out, it's a whole lot easier to go through stuff like that when they say, hey, we caught it early. That's the key to men's health, is catch it early. And so I'm growing this beard. It's my Father Christmas routine. It's also great for my part-time job at Walmart, playing Santa. So I'm just kidding. It's a joke. You guys, man, this is a tough crowd. So anyway, Men's Health Month, really important. I'll be down in Texas next week at the Texas LODD Symposium. It's a wonderful time. You can stream it. You can to your whole department for the entire year. You can buy to have it streamed. The people don't have to be there. It's archivable, so you can watch it. Great presenters: Billy Goldfeder, Gordon Graham, Mike Teague. Just a whole lineup of really, really wonderful people. It's a really, really worthwhile program. I'll be down there all week. So please take a look at that. Remember, EMS Today is coming up, and we'll be out there at National Harbor. So I know Dave will be there. I know Chief Thomas will be there. I'll be visiting with your organizations, and we've got all kinds of great, opportunities for people to come. A lot of fire-based medicine, a lot of community-based paramedicine, which is really, when we talk about what we're doing, I think one of the chiefs said it best. We're great at talking on the radio because we do it to hospitals because we do it so much. And can we simulate that? Absolutely. Can we get better at that? Absolutely. And are there issues that we need to be studying about? And the best minds in the world in the community are coming, whether you're an EMT or whether you're a PA in a hospital or even an RN or an LPN or a nurse practitioner working inside the system. There's something for you at EMS today. Besides a lot of really great networking, and as Dave and the chief can attest to, National Harbor, in terms of a great place to visit, is literally second to none. The facilities there are amazing. The restaurants and the activities for those of you who drink are plentiful, which is as I understand it, part of the mating ritual. It's a good thing. So there you go. So that's happening in February. So take a look at that, and FDIC happens right after that. So Dave, it's always great to see you. If you don't know who Dave Polikoff is, Google that name, and you'll get like 8,552 articles that he wrote last year. And prolific writer, brilliant mind, incredible firefighter, true gentleman, true master of the game. And it comes across. Chief Thomas, as always, it's always good to hear your voice. And no one talked about leadership in this group because they didn't have to. And I gave PJ a hard time when he showed up because I love him and I can, because I'm older than him. Heck, I'm his dad's age. But these guys are real leaders. And Frank Ricci, obviously, that goes without saying. If you want to look at fellas who you want to emulate, and part of what you're talking about when you're talking about command is command presence. And every gentleman on this call today has that in spades, has it. Your royal flushes when it comes to command presence. And that's more of a compliment to your parents than anything, but it's also a compliment to your institutions, because as people come into them, they're groomed a certain way. And it can either be the dark side where it's all criticism and naysaying and tearing things down, or you can raise a community of builders. And obviously your organization has built a community of builders, and your predecessors are to be complimented, and their predecessors to be complimented, probably back 8,000 generations. So, but clearly in the last 200 years, great job with that organization building a world-class fire department. So to everybody, we'll see you down in Texas, and have a great Halloween, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Chief.
Have a great day. Thank you, everybody.
See ya.